People of a certain generation listening to this programme will know that Waterford, in its time, had its own Magdalene Laundry situated at the Good Shepherd Convent. Now this story that the Irish Human Rights Commission, the IHRC, has called on the government to immediately establish a statutory inquiry into the treatment of women and girls in all the Magdalene Laundries which existed in this country at one time. I'm joined now by Stephen O Riordan of the Magdalene Survivors Group. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well indeed. Welcome back to the programme. Now, of course, you made the documentary last year called The Forgotten Maggies.
Yeah.
What's your response to this news from the Irish Human Rights Commission yesterday afternoon?
Well, to say I'm a bit amused would be an understatement, because we've already covered this in the documentary with the Irish Human Rights Commissioner Group, because we wrote to them in 2007 and asked them for an inquiry into the Magdalene Laundries, and they wrote back saying that while they could do an inquiry, they couldn't force the hand of the government to actually apologise or to do anything with regard to the Magdalene Laundries. Now, I know from the recommendation yesterday it is great that they're saying to the government that they should do something, but ultimately the Irish Human Rights Commissioner can't force the government to apologise or to accept the responsibility of the Magdalene Laundries. Because your statement was quite long, but the government was saying that they didn't have an opportunity to kind of take part in this inquiry that the Irish Human Rights Commissioner did, but we all know that the Magdalene women have met with different government officials on numerous occasions and have outlined the state responsibility that it has and its obligation it had to the women. So I don't understand how the government have suddenly said that they were never given an opportunity or never heard.
Okay, but Stephen, isn't the Commission specifically addressing the stories of those women who ended up in these laundries and then exited these laundries because of a court process? In other words, some court order was made to place them in, and that meant that the state was involved. But others ended up in the laundries, as you well know, and the state had nothing to do with them being there.
A few of the women obviously ended up in Magdalene Laundries, and the state would have had no kind of responsibility of them getting there. But what we need to understand is that when the women actually got there, they were forced into forced labour, and under the Forced Labour Convention Act of 1930, I'm sure we would find that the state had an obligation to ensure that these women were actually being protected in terms of their hygiene, the quality of the work that they were doing, the standard of the environment that they were working in. So, just because the women entered into these convents doesn't necessarily mean that we, the state or society, washed our hands of them. And I think this is the problem, because we've now gone beyond the stage where people accept the fact that not all these women had children out of wedlock. What we actually are beginning to realise is that these institutions were there to basically help fund religious orders in order to keep them open, and the women were used basically as rubbish to actually work for these women as slaves. Slavery.
Okay, I'm not defending any of the religious orders. Of course, they might come on and say that they saw it rather differently.
There's no way they could have seen it differently, because why would you change somebody's name? Why would you deny somebody the right to vote? Why would you deny somebody the right to express themselves, to develop physically, personally, mentally? Why would you deny the person the right to leave at their own accord? Why would you force a person to do work that they don't want to do? Why would you not pay somebody? Why would you punish somebody for not doing an order that the nun has given? Why would you make somebody eat off the floor? Why would you tie a rope around a woman's neck to show her the punishment for not carrying out an order that the nun did? Why would you lock somebody out in the freezing cold for 3 days and 3 nights? Why would you beat somebody? Why would women jump over the wall and escape, trying to get away from these institutions? I mean, you ask yourself all these questions. Nobody wanted to be in these institutions.
One of the more interesting, but one of the equally interesting findings of the Irish Human Rights Commission on this is that it also found that the state may have breached its obligation on forced or compulsory labour under the 1930 Forced Labour Convention in not suppressing / outlawing the practice in these laundries and in actually engaging in trade with the convents running the laundries for goods produced as a result of forced labour. Obviously, the state sent its dirty laundry, quite literally, to these laundries and had it washed and sent back to them.
Yes, absolutely. And what we must understand is that from 1979 up to 1994, the state and the Eastern Health Board was funding Magdalene Laundries on the eastern side of Ireland. So the state were funding these institutions, and there is no way that the state can abdicate its responsibility and its moral obligation to these women. And ultimately, I would see as a young person living in Ireland that this is one of the stories that has never been actually properly acknowledged and recognised for the injustice that these women have suffered. And women in in my opinion, continue to be second-class citizens, and I don't understand why women in Ireland haven't got up and supported these women who are out there campaigning. Like, we must realise that some of these women are in their 80s, 60s, 70s, and they're coming out now saying that this happened to them, and we're almost ignoring them to the point that they're not getting the proper justice or recognition for what they suffered. I mean, we have met with Mary Harney, we've met with John Gormley, Bat O'Keefe, Mary Coughlin, we've written to all the TDs, all the ministers, and I just found it really amusing yesterday to think that the government were saying that they were never given an opportunity to take part in this inquiry when they themselves have a cross-party committee made up of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, TDs, and the women that I'm working with presented all this information which showed that the state did send women to the Magdalene Laundries. We outlined the abuse that the women suffered, and they know in great detail that these women did suffer and that there was an injustice put upon them.
Stephen, I'm going to move on to a local councillor in a moment and let you go, but before I do, I mean, what do you say, and I know I put this to you before, but just to remind our listeners, again, we had a Magdalene Laundry here in Waterford in the Good Shepherd Convent, and countless people in Waterford thought that they were actually doing the best by sending their laundry to the place to have it cleaned.
Well, unfortunately, I suppose what has materialised is that those who sent their dirty laundry to the Magdalene Laundry actually reinforced and redefined.
But they didn't know what was going on behind closed doors, they would have claimed.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that unfortunately it has materialised that these institutions were not exactly what they were supposed to be, and the women suffered as a consequence and continue to suffer today because we as a society will not recognise the injustice that they have suffered.
Now, in the Irish Human Rights Commission, in calling on the government to immediately establish a statutory inquiry, and it also said that appropriate financial redress should be made available to survivors. Leaving the financial redress issue out, just for the moment, what should that statutory inquiry, what issues should it address?
Well, I think the issues that it should address are the constitutional issues and obviously the human rights issues as to why and how these women ended up there and why we as a society completely forgot about them and left them there and have not recognised the injustice that they have suffered. You must also realise that some of these women who entered into the Magdalene Laundries were actually then transferred into state-run mental institutions in Grangegarman and Dublin. Like, this goes on to a far bigger, deeper crisis than what we actually realise. On the surface, we think that it's a bunch of women washing laundry when in actual fact we're actually talking about the dignity and the human rights of an individual. And we as a society are almost saying that these 30,000 women don't even matter. I think even a lot of people, and maybe some of your listeners, won't even realise that over 1,000 women who are in Magdalene Laundries are buried in mass graves throughout Ireland. And one of the biggest exhumations carried out was in 1993, where 155 bodies were exhumed. Now, only 103 of those women were actually identified. The other 52 were not identified, and one of those women, her skull was missing. And nobody from the state, nobody in the guards, nobody in the environmental health officer called for an inquiry into how this was possible, that 155 women were buried in mass graves, and yet we still have over 1,000 women buried in mass graves throughout Ireland with no identification, no headcross, no headstone, no recognition for the life that they lived. And I think that...
Stephen, you're a young man in your mid-20s. Why are you so passionate about this?
Because I think everybody has the right to dignity and everybody has the right to be recognised for the individual that they are. And I think we as a society, moreover, should understand that it is unfair and unjustifiable to think that we can live in a world where we don't recognise individuals. And we had that in our past where foreign countries have come in and taken us over and suppressed us. And I don't understand why we feel it's okay that we as an Irish country and as Irish individuals should suppress these women, and for it to be almost okay for that to happen. I don't think as a young person that is fair, and I think the right of every individual should be recognised.
All right, we leave you there. Thanks very much, Stephen, as always. Good morning to you. God bless. That's Stephen O Riordan of the Magdalene Survivors Together group.